I stood outside my office building in downtown Seattle, clutching a very special gift. Today was our 15th wedding anniversary, and I'd bought David a vintage Rolex. It was the exact same watch he'd spotted in a magazine 2 years ago, swearing he'd wear it one day. I had planned so much for this day. I wanted to surprise him. Our company, Apex Innovations, was housed in this gorgeous building. A towering skyscraper of glass and steel, it stood proudly in the heart of the city. I rarely came into the office. I always preferred working behind the scenes. I loved writing code, designing systems, and building the company's infrastructure. David, on the other hand, thrived on networking, speaking on stage, and giving interviews to the press. He had become the face of our company, and I never had an issue with that. I always believed marriage wasn't a competition. We were on the exact same team. I stepped into the elevator and hit the button for the 25th floor, a soft smile on my face. When the doors slid open, I stepped out to find a new girl sitting at the reception desk. She didn't recognize me. She asked if I was there to join the celebration. I figured David had probably thrown a small anniversary party at the office. He loved putting on a show like that. I told her yes. That's exactly why I was there. She pointed me toward the main hall. As I got closer, I could hear a roaring round of applause and people cheering. About 300 employees were gathered in the room. Soft blue lights shone from the ceiling, illuminating a small stage at the front. Champagne bottles were popping. I hung back by the edge of the crowd so David wouldn't spot me. I wanted to reveal myself at just the right moment. But then my eyes landed on the stage, and I froze. David was up there, but he wasn't alone. Emily was standing right beside him. She was our company's new vice president, someone David had hired just a few months prior. Emily was stunning, much younger than me, and possessed a magnetic confidence that drew people in. David was smiling, flashing that signature public smile he always reserved for the cameras. Suddenly, David got down on one knee. A hush fell over the hall, followed instantly by a deafening uproar. For a split second, I thought it had to be a joke, some kind of corporate skit. But then David pulled a velvet box from his pocket. He popped it open, and the diamond inside caught the light. Emily covered her mouth with both hands, tears welling in her eyes. She nodded, yes. David slipped the ring onto her finger, stood up, and kissed her. It wasn't just a peck. It was the kind of kiss that made it painfully obvious they'd been into each other for a long time. No man kisses another woman like that, unless he's already betrayed his wife 1,000 times in his head. The vintage watch box in my hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy. An employee standing next to me whispered, "What an amazing couple. They look so perfect together." Perfect. That word pierced through the noise and rang in my ears. Right at that moment, David looked out at the crowd. His eyes scanned the room, and then they locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, all the noise in that massive hall seemed to evaporate. David's public smile vanished as if someone had flipped a switch. All the color drained from his face. He knew I'd seen everything. Still, he didn't move a muscle. He didn't call out my name. He didn't step off the stage. Emily followed his gaze and noticed me. A look of sheer confusion washed over her face, as if she were wondering who this strange woman glaring at them was. She politely mouthed the words, "Do we know each other?" And that's when it hit me. David hadn't just cheated on me, he had completely erased me from the very world I had built with my own 2 hands. My dignity, my self-respect. It was all being shredded in front of hundreds of strangers. But I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just turned on my heel and walked back toward the elevators. The receptionist caught me leaving and smiled. "Have a great day." I walked out without saying a word. I got into my car and sat there, my hands trembling. The sound of that applause was still ringing in my ears. I could have marched back up there and thrown that watch right in his face. I could have screamed, shouted, and exposed his lies to the entire company. But when anger cuts that deep, it goes quiet. Dead quiet. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer, Robert. Robert had been my father's attorney and handled all of my family's legal affairs. As soon as he picked up, I said, "Robert, my husband just got engaged to his vice president." A heavy silence hung on the line. I could hear Robert breathing. Finally, he said, "I'm heading to the office right now." I replied, my voice completely steady. "No. Start with our holding company." Robert paused for a second and asked, "Are you sure?" I looked through my windshield at the building where my husband was busy celebrating with another woman. I said, "Yes. Freeze all my assets and my 82% stake. Right now." Robert knew exactly what that meant. "This is going to trigger a massive capital event," he warned. "All their credit lines will be suspended. The entire company's infrastructure will crash." I closed my eyes and said, "Do it." I started the car and drove toward my house on Mercer Island. On the way, my phone started blowing up. The first call, then the second, then the 10th. By the time I pulled into my driveway, David had called me 28 times. I walked inside without even taking off my coat. I just stood in the living room, staring out the window. A few minutes later, a black car sped up and slammed on the brakes outside my house. It was David's company car. David scrambled out. He hadn't even parked properly. He sprinted to the door and started leaning on the doorbell, ringing it frantically like he was trying to wake the dead. I didn't open the door. He yelled from outside, "Emma, please open the door. I can explain everything." I stepped quietly to the door and watched him through the side glass panel. He was still in his suit. His tie was crooked. His hair was a mess. And despite the February chill, he was sweating profusely. For the first time all day, David actually looked like a man who realized that consequences catch up faster than excuses. I cracked the door open just a few inches. His eyes darted from my face, to my coat, to the vintage watch box still clutched in my hand. He whispered, "Emma, it's not what it looks like." I just stared at him, and for a second I almost laughed. After everything that had just happened, he still thought his infidelity was my biggest problem. He had absolutely no idea that his entire empire had already started burning to the ground behind him. Very calmly, I asked, "Then tell me, what did it look like?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Just then, the phone in his pocket started to ring. Not mine, his. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and whatever name he saw made him go completely pale. I knew exactly what it was before he even said a word. The board had found out. David rejected the call. He stepped closer and pleaded, "Emma, we need to go inside and talk." I flatly refused. "No." His eyes darted toward the street. Our neighbors noticed things like this, and David knew it. He had spent years cultivating the image of the perfect husband and a visionary businessman. Begging on his own doorstep completely ruined the brand. Lowering his voice, he pleaded, "Please, I made a mistake." I shot back. Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. Missing a flight is a mistake. Proposing to another woman in front of 300 employees is not a mistake. His jaw clenched. "Things just got out of hand," he insisted. I actually chuckled at that. That was vintage David. He could frame a catastrophic disaster as if it were just a sudden change in the weather. I asked, "When did things get out of hand? Before you bought the ring, or after you put it on her finger?" He swallowed hard. His phone started ringing again. This time, he looked at the screen and angled it away from me. But I'd already seen it. It was my lawyer, Robert. Panic set in. He whispered, "What did you do?" I leaned against the doorframe, and for the first time my hands stopped shaking. "I just protected what's mine," I said. His expression shifted. The panic morphed into calculation. It was the exact same look I'd seen in conference rooms for years whenever a deal started slipping through his fingers. He said, "Emma, you can't just pull all the capital like that. There are rules. There are clauses." I corrected him. "Yes, there are clauses, and you sign them." He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. 14 years ago, when our company was just a tiny software platform, David never talked about rules or clauses. Back then, he talked about dreams. Back then, I wrote the code, and he sold our vision to the world. We were a great team. My father was the first to invest in the company, not because he believed in David, but because he believed in me. When he passed away, his shares transferred to a family holding company, and after years of investments and agreements, that holding company ended up owning 82% of Apex Innovations. David knew this. He was the one who told me to stay out of the public eye, arguing that investors prefer to trust a single face. I had agreed. But acknowledging a truth and actually respecting it are two very different things. Softening his tone, he said, "You're angry, I get it. You have every right to be angry." I replied, "No, I had every right to know that my husband was living like a bachelor at his own office." His face fell. He quickly added, "Emily didn't know anything." I was surprised, but I didn't let it show. "Didn't know what?" I asked. He looked away. "About us." I repeated, "About us?" David lowered his eyes. "I told her we were separated." A cold chill ran down my spine. I remembered Emily's confused smile when she mouthed, "Do we know each other?" She hadn't said it out of arrogance. She genuinely had no clue who I was. I looked at David. "You told her we were separated while you slept in my bed every single night." David squeezed his eyes shut. "Emma, please." I kept going. "When we went on vacation together last month, you were separated. And this morning, when you kissed me goodbye, you were separated." Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Robert. "Emergency board meeting at 7:30 p.m. You need to join via video. Do not discuss any company matters with David." I turned my phone so he could read the first line. His jaw dropped. "Emma, don't do this tonight," he begged. I replied, "I didn't do this tonight, you did." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking incredibly old and exhausted. He said, "If they push me out, everything falls apart. People will lose their jobs. Good people with families." "That's the first honest thing you've said all day," I told him. "And it's something you should have thought about before you turned their office into your engagement party." He had no response. I asked, "Does Emily know the truth now?" His silence gave me my answer. "Then go explain it to her," I said, starting to close the door. He reached out and stopped it. "Are you divorcing me?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He panicked. "And what about the company?" I shut the door in his face, saying, "The company was never yours." At 7:30 p.m., I was sitting at my dining table. My laptop was open, and Robert's face was on the screen. One by one, the board members joined the call. Everyone looked visibly stressed and anxious. Then David popped up on screen. He wasn't on my porch anymore. He was in his office. His tie was off, and his top button was undone. The man who was famous for his flawless public image now just looked ordinary and utterly defeated. The meeting began. The chairman of the board adjusted his glasses and started speaking very carefully. "We've received notice that Carter Family Holdings has suspended all equity and capital support, effective immediately." Nobody looked at David. All eyes were on me. The chairman asked, "Mrs. Carter, can you confirm that this notice is legitimate?" "Yes," I said. He continued, "And does Carter Family Holdings still hold an 82% stake in Apex Innovations?" In a calm voice, I replied, "Yes." A heavy silence filled the virtual room. Several directors knew the ownership structure on paper, but paper and reality are two different things. For years, David had been the face of the company. Employees repeated his quotes. Reporters called him the founder. People started believing that the face they saw was the actual owner. David had even started believing it himself. David leaned toward his camera and pleaded, "Emma, please don't make any permanent decisions based on today's emotions." Robert gave me a subtle signal to stay quiet. I responded coolly, "I haven't made any decisions today. I'm simply exercising the rights I've had for years." David closed his eyes. The chairman turned to David. "David, is there anything else you need to disclose before we proceed?" A long pause followed. Finally, David spoke up. "My personal life has gotten a bit complicated." One of the directors asked dryly, "Complicated?" Another board member cut right to the chase. "Did you present yourself as an unmarried man within this company?" David hesitated, then admitted, "Yes." They pressed on. "Were you actually married?" Looking down, David said, "Yes." "Was the executive leadership aware of your marriage?" "No." An awkward silence washed over the meeting. Nobody cared that David had cheated on his wife. They cared that the CEO had concealed critical personal information and carried on a public relationship with another executive within the company. This was no longer just about infidelity. It was a corporate governance nightmare. The company's head of legal spoke up. "Given the circumstances, I recommend that Mr. Carter be placed on administrative leave immediately, pending a full independent investigation." David stared into the camera. "You've got to be kidding me." The chairman let out a heavy sigh. "I wish we were." By 8:30 p.m., the news hadn't leaked to the media yet, but inside Apex Innovations, everyone knew. Someone saw David carrying his belongings out in a cardboard box. Someone else noticed that Emily's office door was locked from the inside. Security had quietly deactivated David's executive access card. No one was speaking publicly, but in private group chats, photos and gossip were spreading like wildfire. When I woke up the next morning, I'd only managed to get 3 hours of sleep. For the first time in years, David wasn't sleeping beside me. The house was eerily quiet. I got up, made some coffee, and fed my old golden retriever, Murphy. I stood by the window, watching the neighborhood kids wait for the school bus. The outside world was still turning, just like it always did. That gave me a strange sense of comfort. My world had shattered, but everyone else's was fine. At 9:15, Robert showed up at my door carrying 2 thick folders. He told me the banks had halted the acquisition financing. I asked him what he'd told them. With a faint smile, Robert said, "I told them the true owner still has complete faith in the company." I was surprised he'd said that. He looked at me and said, "You never wanted to destroy the company." I replied, "No, I just wanted to stop a man from pretending he owned it." People often think revenge is about burning everything to the ground, but sometimes revenge is just stopping someone from taking credit for what you built. Around noon, my phone rang. Emily's name flashed on the screen. I answered. Her voice sounded nothing like the confident executive I'd seen in meetings. It was quiet and frail. She said, "I know I have no right to call you." I answered honestly, "No, you don't." She took a deep breath. "I truly didn't know anything." I replied, "I believe you." Emily's voice cracked. "David told me you two had been separated for almost 2 years. He even showed me lease papers for an apartment." That stopped me in my tracks. "What apartment?" I asked. Dead silence on the other end. Then Emily explained that he had rented a place downtown. I just stared blankly at the wall. David hadn't rented a second apartment to live in. He rented it to legitimize a lie. Every late-night meeting, every business trip that ran long, he always had a place to go. Emily whispered, "I feel so disgusted." I said, "You should." she said. I'm so sorry. Staring out the window, I replied, I don't know you well enough yet to forgive you. She quietly accepted that. Robert called again that evening, a newfound urgency in his voice. We found something, he said. Old approval records. I drove straight to his office. He had documents scattered all over the conference table, expense approvals, share transfer forms, investment papers. He pointed to the signatures on a few of them and said, These are your signatures. I looked closely, and a sickening knot formed in my stomach. No, I said. They're very good forgeries, but I never signed these. Robert placed a document with my actual signature right next to them. The difference was subtle, but undeniable. David hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He had been forging my signature on company documents for years. Crossing his arms, Robert said, We're running a forensic audit on every executive approval from the last 5 years. I leaned back in my chair and asked softly, How many documents are there? Hundreds, he replied. In that moment, everything shifted. Until now, I thought this was just a case of infidelity, but it had escalated into outright corporate fraud and criminal activity. Robert looked at me. Emma, if this is proven in the investigation, David isn't just going to lose his marriage. I finished his sentence. He's going to lose everything. The next 48 hours operated like a well-oiled machine. Robert brought in a forensic accounting firm from New York. They set up shop in a closed-off conference room at the company. I stayed away from the office because I didn't want anyone to dismiss this as a messy marital spat. I wanted everything strictly based on hard evidence. By the third day, they uncovered the whole scheme. It wasn't just a stray forged signature, it was a systematic operation. Using my name, David had pushed through fraudulent loans, expensed his personal lifestyle to the company, and awarded lucrative contracts to his buddies. On Thursday evening, Robert called and said, Emma, we have enough. I was standing in the laundry room folding one of David's white dress shirts. I looked at the shirt and felt stupid for even touching it. I asked, Enough to hand over to the board and the police? Yes, Robert confirmed. I closed my eyes for a second. Then I thought of the ring he slipped onto Emily's finger. Then send it, I said. The next morning brought another emergency board meeting. This time, David wasn't summoned as the CEO, but as a criminal under investigation. Emily was on the video call too, looking incredibly composed. When the chairman asked her if she knew David was married or who really owned the company, she denied it completely. She stated, David told me his wife had nothing to do with the business and that the ownership paperwork was just an old family formality. An old family formality. That was how David had dismissed years of my hard work and my father's trust. Then, the investigators presented their findings. Without raising a single voice, they laid out all the evidence. The forged signatures, the fake invoices. They even showed how David had written off that downtown apartment as a client hospitality suite on the company dime. Emily covered her mouth at one point. David just sat there, paralyzed. He offered a weak defense. These things are being misrepresented. The lead investigator shot back, Mr. Carter, metadata doesn't have an agenda, it just has timestamps. David looked at my square on the screen and sneered. You're enjoying this. I replied, completely unfazed. No, David, I'm not enjoying this. I'm just surviving it. By noon, the board had terminated David, revoked all of his shares, and initiated legal action against him. Emily was placed on leave until the investigation wrapped up. That afternoon, Emily asked to meet. We met at a tiny coffee shop outside the city. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and the engagement ring was gone. As soon as she saw me, she said, I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I wanted to look you in the eye and say it. I studied her face. There was no arrogance, no victory, just pure shame. She said, I believed everything he said. He made me feel like I was the most special person in the world to him. That stung a bit, because I knew firsthand that David could make any woman feel that way. I told her, he lied to both of us. But he was married to me. His first obligation was to me. Tears filled Emily's eyes. I could have hated her, but hating is the easy way out. The truth was, she was just a victim of the exact same lie I was. I said, I won't protect you from the professional fallout, but I'm not going to punish you for what he did on his own. 3 nights later, David showed up at my house. This time, he didn't lay on the doorbell. He just knocked once and waited. I looked out the window. He looked absolutely nothing like the man I used to love. His coat was wrinkled, he was unshaven, and all his swagger was completely gone. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain locked. He said, I deserve this. I said, yes. His voice was heavy. I lost the company. I corrected him. No, you just lost the illusion that it was ever yours. He sighed. I'm not here to beg you to stop the investigation or take me back. I'm just here to apologize. The old Emma might have softened, but I was different now. I asked him, are you apologizing because you hurt me, or because your own life is ruined? David stood there in silence for a long time. Finally, barely above a whisper, he said, I honestly don't know anymore. It was the first genuinely truthful thing he'd said since Valentine's Day. Without any anger, I simply and gently closed the door. Through the window, I watched him walk back to his car. His shoulders were slumped, and he looked like a man who had spent years climbing a mountain with the wrong map. My dog Murphy trotted over to me. I patted his head and whispered, I think we're going to be just fine. The divorce took months. The paperwork was endless, but thanks to our prenup and my clear ownership structure, it was legally straightforward. David never challenged my ownership because he didn't have a leg to stand on. The forgery charges ended in a plea deal that came with heavy restrictions. Emily was cleared in the investigation, and 6 weeks later, the board reinstated her as CEO. Before accepting the position, she called me and offered to step down if I wasn't comfortable with it. I told her, you earned that job on your own merit. Just do it honestly. The board actually offered the CEO spot to me, but I declined. I took on the role of executive chair so I could focus on long-term strategy, leaving the day-to-day operations to Emily. A few months later, I found those Paris tickets buried in my desk drawer. I fed the handwritten card into the shredder and booked a brand new trip for myself. I went to Paris alone. I spent time wandering the streets, drinking coffee, and standing on the very bridge where David and I had made our vows years ago. This time, I made a vow to myself, never let anyone diminish your worth. About a year later, our company launched a new investment initiative aimed at women and first-time entrepreneurs. It was an idea that had been locked away in my notebook for years. At the launch event, Emily thanked the board and the employees, and then she mentioned my name. She said, some people build companies, but Emma built a culture where truth matters more than appearances. The applause that followed was very different from the clapping I'd heard on Valentine's Day. This applause was for something real. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from David. He wrote that he was working at a small software startup in Vermont. He wasn't a big shot anymore. He was the guy unlocking the doors in the morning and brewing coffee for the staff. He said he spent every single day wondering if he'd ever become the kind of man who actually deserved the forgiveness he had asked for. I tossed the letter into a box of old photographs. People ask me if taking revenge brought me peace. The truth is, revenge only brought me justice. Peace came when I stopped measuring my life by someone else's lies. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's refusing to become someone you were never meant to be. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in Emma's shoes? Would you have made the same choices? or taken a different path? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dives into stories of betrayal, justice, resilience, and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to Book Bite Studio so we can keep this journey going together.